don't think I can think of a single romantic comedy written since then that ends in the way that this one ends.
Billionaire Boys have a lot of money,
Yep.
and therefore have ownership or partial ownership over an island. And included in that is to withdraw from women,
Yes.
to
fast, to sort of, I guess, in their minds, strive for whatever enlightenment is to them and to be the best version of themselves. But that includes things like fasting, being celibate, not engaging in any conversation with women, or, you know, sort of just removing themselves entirely from the world. And then you have the princess on business who has to go there to make some negotiations regarding this plot of land, and she also brings her entourage of female friends with her, and obviously that stirs the pot a bit. You have this very hyper masculinized world, and they sort of mastered capitalism, and, you know, it's this very it is that the billionaire boys, sort of that 1% of the uber wealthy, and then you sort of inject it with this very feminine energy that comes into it, and sort of how that unravels. It's quite an interesting picture.
It's an amazing moment to join the RSC. I've never done any show at the RSC ever before, so yeah, it feels like there's a real momentum to it, and I think the one thing I can say, it's always difficult because obviously it's early, even, you know, it's been 4 weeks, but it's still early days to sort of draw any conclusions. But it's a very fresh room, as in, I think what I really like is that there are lots of people there. It's actually a lot of people's debut, the RSC debut. And yeah, I just think it really feels like a really, the perfect sort of room to tackle this sort of play.
I think being on a thrust stage always feels more like you're more amongst it, I think, and it feels more shared. I think Pros Arch sometimes feels like you're in a big TV and there's a bit of a distance between you and the audience, whereas there's more angles, and when you're out in a thrust stage, and there's and you feel like it's a sort of more shared experience. I think I always prefer performing on thrust.
This is my first professional theatre job. I just work in telly normally, like in telly comedy specifically. So this is such a departure for me. It's something so new. I sort of just feel like I've won a competition. Do you know what I mean? I'm very happy to be here. So I'm just thrilled. I'm so excited to see the space. I'm so excited to properly, you know, crack on. And there is something undeniably cool about working with the RSC. You know, just that name alone. It's like a sort of, it's great in conversation with actor friends as well. It's just a spell you can conjure for them to sort of respect you and think you're very, very impressive. So that's good.
It feels very alive to be working on a thrust. You know, it's a 360, almost 360 experience, and that feels very real.
You know, comedy just means they get married in the end. I feel like, and actually, even that's interesting in terms of this play. But the way in which Shakespeare used the word comedy, yes, there are moments that are more funny, but I think sometimes the comedies get a little bit short shrift as sort of farces, when actually I think their intent is as serious, I think, as a lot of the more serious plays. And by serious, I don't mean to be po-faced about it. I just mean that there is actual content in there, and they're actually talking about something. I think often just because they're romantic, or because they sort of get this, they got sort of cast aside sometimes as it's just a bit of silly fun, and I don't think it's useful to tackle anything like that. I mean, if something gets laughs and it's funny, then that's great, and there is a lot of comedy in the play, and there's a lot of fun to be had in the play, but it is also a play, quite a serious play actually, that has actually something quite interesting to say about male-female relationships.
It's one of Shakespeare's lesser-known works, and so in my experience, I can only speak for myself, the text is a bit more difficult to buy into straight away. It's not as easy first time to read it on the page and go, yeah, I understand what's going on here.
So going through together and incredibly rigorously making sure we all understand every single word, why it's used, and how we're gonna, that our challenge is to make that translatable to a modern audience. I thought was incredibly helpful and incredibly interesting.
There's not been like a set thing that's been imposed on any of us. Like, all of us have been really allowed to like bring ourselves to the characters. It's felt very back and forth and collaborative. Do you know what I mean? Because I think sometimes that's not always the case. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you go into a job, not necessarily just theatre, but you go into a job and there's a very set way of doing things. And this has felt really like we've all been able to bring our own specific flavour to it, which is a very cool privilege.
It's good to be quite rough and ready, I think, with Shakespeare plays. And if something is not going to work anymore, then you cut it, because what's the point? It's not a museum. But actually, the concept is really interesting because it sort of, I think, flags up in much sort of starker relief the fact that it is a play that's got a lot of things to say. It's sort of like a study of male pride in some ways, which I think is very topical at the moment. It's something that we're thinking about a lot. I think it's also about this idea of, and it's obviously all weaved into love, the idea of falling in love, but actually, the idea that these 4 lords buy this Polynesian island, basically, just for self-improvement, which again, all very modern themes. The idea of sort of working on yourself and the sort of drive to do that and what that's about. But and then just this idea of Edenizing that part of the world. The idea of there are these these paradise islands where nothing bad can ever happen. And part of the journey of the comedy, of any comedy in Shakespeare actually, is the idea of a bubble gets popped. Like there's this sort of it's Arden, whether it's Arden or whether it's in Twelfth Night Illyria, like there's this sort of make-believe, lovely sort of fantasy world, and then there's reality that comes and shocks it. And so what a great setting, these islands where, for example, not to bring that in necessarily, but we think of these islands as these sort of like beautiful paradises where nothing bad can happen. They're the first on the firing line when it comes to global warming, and to actually the reality, to actually like real disaster. And so again, without sort of like signposting it or crowbarring something in, actually I think what the context that Emily has found for it is it just makes the play suddenly evocative in a modern context.
It's a really diverse room. There is so many different accents, character choices, and native and heritages in the room, not just Asia in our particular setting, but also Europe and America. So it's a really dynamic room full of lots of discussion that really analyses kind of every aspect of the text. And Emily is really forthright with her willingness to let us dig into the depths of that and also challenge things that come up within the text that make that difficult.
Familiarity is such a problem with Shakespeare that you sort of feel like you're performing, and there's nothing wrong with this, but performing to more 5% of the population who've seen 56 Macbeths. And so, it's amazing, particularly I think with this play, as I say, because I think this play does something quite radical, actually, in the way it ends. And it's funny, actually, I was talking to someone about this the other day. I feel like it's a play, we see ourselves as people who formally have done everything in terms of like, storytelling. But actually, I don't think I can think of a single romantic comedy written since then that ends in the way that this one ends. So you sort of think, wow.
And the entire cast is phenomenal.
They're so funny. Oh my god, it's such a cast of
laughs.
funny bones. I have abs. I've developed abs.
Same.
Because of
Keeps
how
me in
funny
shape.
everyone-
It keeps me in shape.
Genuinely,
It does.
fantastic.